Welcome to Surrender School, Emotional Sobriety Workshop. Discerning Our Emotional Dependency.
Hey, welcome back. It's good to see everyone. Today we're doing chapter 5, Discerning Our Emotional Dependency. And a key reason why we aren't emotionally sober is because we are emotionally dependent. So I really thought this chapter was great. I'm just going to dive right in. Page 87. Dr. Berger says the solution to your problem is not as simple as getting abstinent. It never is. Next page, he said, trouble doesn't mean something is wrong. It means something is missing. And once again, expectations are part of the problem. That tricky E word. Page 91. He says emotional dependency has a sneaky, harmful effect on our self-esteem and on our relationships. It interferes with our ability to have a healthy relationship because we make the other person too important on the one hand and not important enough on the other. Those two things are true at the same time. We make people too important on one hand and not important on the other hand. And he goes on later in the chapter to explain that. Page 91, Bill W. saw dependence on people and circumstances to fulfill his emotional needs as his most basic flaw. Dr. Berger calls this realization seeing who we aren't. We are not as independent as we thought we could. In fact, we are overly dependent on people and circumstances for emotional support and security. Dr. Berger believes seeing who we aren't is a key to starting to let go of our emotional dependency. This requires rigorous honesty with ourselves if we're going to grow up. I like the way that he phrased that, if we're going to grow up. Page 93. Bill W. realized that his sense of self was contingent on external events. His personal value, his self-esteem, was determined by what happened to him, by how others treated him, or by what others thought about him. Dr. Berger describes this as other validated self-esteem. We get our self-esteem from out there and not from internally, not how we view ourselves, but how others view us. So we are always searching for self-esteem in the environment and in other people. That's what it makes us do. And this makes people too important and gives them too much power over us. Then Dr. Berger talks about and quotes Nathaniel Branden, saying that this makes us see other people essentially as sources of approval or disapproval. We don't appreciate them for who they are in their own right. We only see what they can do or cannot do for us. This makes people unimportant. People just become objects that we manipulate to get our needs met. We demand that others meet our needs, but we don't care about meeting theirs. So you see how that works. When we put our value, our self-esteem onto other people, we make them too important because we depend on them to give us what we need. And we make them unimportant because we don't really care about their needs. We only care about getting our needs met. So those two things are true at the same time. Dr. Berger sums this all up by saying, we become confined by the judgment and actions of others, and then try to take them hostage because we need to control them to ensure they will think about us and treat us the way we secretly demand they should. So essentially, we use relationships to avoid taking responsibility for our individual happiness and satisfaction. And what does that lead to? That just leads to blaming. I mean, we are behaving like children. Remember the phrase about growing up? To me, that's what this process is all about. We are behaving like children. We are seeing other people like children so that they take care of us. And we aren't responsible for our own happiness. And when we grow up, we take responsibility for ourselves, for our individual happiness and satisfaction. Page 97. Our emotional dependency automatically creates a set of unenforceable rules. And those rules come from our blueprint. Remember the blueprint, expansive, self-effacing, and resignation? Well, these unenforceable rules come from those blueprints. Our unenforceable rules are related to the missing experiences in our early development. Some people would call them wounds, our early childhood wounds. One of the examples in the book was, if I wasn't listened to as a child, my unenforceable rule for someone who cared about me would always involve listening to me no matter what. And one of my unenforceable rules is, as a child, I grew up in a very chaotic, conflictual home where there was a lot of anger and a lot of rage and a lot of yelling. And so my unenforceable rule is, if you love me, you'll never get angry. That was mine. Very unenforceable and very unrealistic. So we do everything in our power to enforce these rules. And these rules have only one purpose: to manipulate others into doing what we want them to do. Why? That's an excellent question. We want others to do what we want them to do so that we can feel okay, so that we can feel emotionally safe and secure and okay. Page 100. All of this is based on our need to control the outcomes in our lives to ensure we belong, we are loved, and we are accepted. Does that sound familiar? Okay. We construct our false selves to control how other people respond to us. We change ourselves in order to manipulate others. This behavior is based on the lie that we need people and circumstances to meet our expectations, do what we want, so we can feel secure, happy, and content. And the other lie is that we cannot do this for ourselves. And that's not true. We think we can't make ourselves happy, secure, and content. This leads us to contort and distort our true selves to win admiration and love from others. And isn't that just the very definition of poverty, emotional poverty? So what's the answer to emotional dependency? Dr. Berger says we need to learn to be able to support ourselves and learn to deal with reality as it is. We must learn to care for our own needs. Radical self-care. Page 101. Dr. Berger goes on to say that the bottom line in all of this is that we fear discomfort. He says we have to take radical responsibility for what we are feeling. And we have to relinquish the concept of blame. And we have to let go of our crippling expectations as well. On page 104 to 107, Dr. Berger teaches us an emotional dependency inventory exercise, and you can see an example of this in Appendix B. And so column 1 is we describe what happened. Column 2 is we describe our emotional reaction and what actions we took in response to what happened. Column 3, we identify our expectation, our unenforceable rule, and or our should demands. Column 4, we identify our unhealthy dependence. In column 5, then we list what we can do to support ourselves, hold on to ourselves, and recover our center of gravity and achieve emotional sobriety. And I think it's great that he gave us an exercise we can do, an action we can take when we're stuck in the middle of that, when we find ourselves blaming others for how we feel or blaming others for what we did. We can sit down and do this inventory and get to the bottom of it and figure out how we can better take care of ourselves. So that is all I have today. And so
See you next week.